Before we get started though, normally we would have a wonderful welcome to country from Auntie Violet. And Auntie Violet, I don't know if you saw Auntie Violet last week, but I think she's not going to mix with us plebs anymore because she was doing a welcome to country for King Charles. And then I think my favourite part of the day was when she and King Charles and Albo were there, and she just handed Albo a phone and got Albo to take a photo, a selfie of her and King Charles. So I think we might never see her again at these sort of events. But so I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people on whose land we meet today and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And I'd like to also extend that welcome to any Indigenous or First Nations people here this morning. My name is Lish Faya. I work at ABC, but I've been doing these breakfasts on behalf of WorkSafe ACT for this year, and I must admit it has been extraordinary what I personally have learned about the role of WorkSafe and workplace health and safety in Australia and how important it is. I think so many Australians go home from work not always safe. And whether it's an injury, a mental injury, a psychosocial injury or a physical injury, it's not on. And I look out into the room today and see from high-vis to suits, because it's everyone's issue. And I really appreciate you coming this morning because this is a brain-picking exercise. WorkSafe ACT is putting together a toolkit for HSRs, and I think many of you have already completed the survey online. Can I just have a show of hands who is an HSR within their organisation? And PCBUs? Any PCBUs in the room today? A couple. So this is a really free, open space to get your questions answered, your thoughts, your concerns, because WorkSafe ACT want to build the best possible toolkit they can, so that there are more HSRs in workplace, you feel fully supported and are able to provide that safe workplace. Now, this morning we are being recorded. This is just so that we have it all for future reference that you can refer back to, but please, if you are not comfortable with being recorded, just come and see one of the WorkSafe folk and they will make sure that you're not included. And there may be also some graphic descriptions of injuries and other potentially upsetting, triggering content. Please just look after yourself in this environment. A great lineup of speakers. Now, at the moment, look, this event is almost always booked out before tickets even go on, not sale. It's a free event, so I love that we have to lock the doors and don't let anyone else into this. But it's breakfast. So breakfast will emerge. It's not something that you have to be quiet eating. Just eat, cutlery, drink, fill up your teas and coffees, and enjoy the food, and then we'll fire away with it, because you will work for it. That's what we're here for. Well, let's kick off the morning with the first of our three speakers. Jacqui Agius is the Work Health Safety Commissioner here in the ACT, and she has worked tirelessly in this role. She's also the Labour Hire Licence Commissioner. She will lead our discussion today along with two fabulous panellists, Phil Hammond, who is the Work Health and Safety, he's a specialist trainer, and Dr. Peta Miller, who is a Work Health Safety consultant. So we have the full bottle of expertise who really want to hear from you. So any questions, you've got the QR code. Now, we'll put the QR code up on the screen, but that QR code, you're able to ask questions. There's also a little bit of a survey there, but ask questions. Log in, ask the questions, or during the event after our three speakers, you can raise your hand. A question we've had already, just on notice, and these are some of the questions that we'll be answering today. Are there pancakes? I can answer that. No, but let me tell you, it's a fantastic breakfast. So let's kick it off. I'd like to first welcome Jacqui Agius to the stage this morning. Please give her a big warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're on, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge any other families and people with connections to the ACT and our regions. That was me when I started this job. This is me now. 4 years, 4.5 years, and menopause, and this is what happens. Just kidding. I raise menopause because, of course, when we're a HSR, we should also be considering how different individuals respond in the work environments and what we need to do for those people. HSRs, wow, what a topic. We've been wanting to attack this for a while at WorkSafe ACT, and we have finally got there. And today is the start of coming out to you, our community, workers, HSRs in the ACT, so that you can tell us what you need from us. So the sorts of things that we're thinking about is our HSR toolkit, but also thinking about having a HSR network that we can have meetings with, that we can provide information to. So it's really refreshing to see a number of HSRs in the room. What we know about HSRs is that the construction industry and first responders generally do this really, really well. But we need to, HSRs are such an integral part of a safe work system, and when they are utilised properly, they can actually assist all of the workers and they can assist the PCBU, and ultimately the role is that conduit role between the employer and the workplace. Those of you who have been to some of these breakfasts before will note that I don't have any notes today. The reason I don't have any notes today is because my technology isn't working, so we're just going to go to the next slide. Thanks, guys. I think, so that I can read them. So when we look at a HSR, there are a few skills that we need to consider. And what I would say to workers is be really particular about who you are electing as a HSR. The reason that you need to be particular is because a HSR should have really good negotiation skills. They should be solutions focused rather than problems focused. So going to a PCBU and raising an issue is a really important role, a really important part of a HSR. But before you do that, I would suggest that you speak to your work group and you ask them how they would like the safety issue controlled, so that when you speak to the employer, you're actually going to them with some suggested solutions rather than going to them just saying, well, this is the safety issue, fix it. The other thing that we often see in workplaces is PCBUs think that the HSR is there to fix all of the safety problems. That's not the role of the HSR, and I want to be really clear about that. It's not the HSR's role to conduct the risk assessments or to solve the safety issue. It's the HSR's role to be that intermediary communication between the workforce and the employer. And, you know, we've seen lots of things out on the field, and some of the things that we see, for instance, and some of the things that we hear are HSRs saying things like, well, I've raised this issue with the PCBU and it hasn't been resolved. Or HSRs saying the PCBU just thinks I'm a problem and that I'm a troublemaker. And the other side of that is the PCBU saying, oh, not the HSR again. And they're the sorts of things that we've heard. And so that has prompted us to want to ensure that the communication between a PCBU and a HSR is a good relationship, because we won't solve safety issues in a workplace if we both come from a heightened position. We actually need to come from a position where we're there to resolve a safety issue and we both want to do that. So I would encourage workers to ensure that when they're choosing a HSR, that HSR is able to be solutions focused rather than problems focused. I've already spoken about the fact that we're developing a suite of documents and we're seeking your input. Thank you. We can go to the next slide. So HSRs are elected and they're representatives of workers. Their role also includes consulting. So if the PCBU wants to consult over safety issues, they should also be consulting with the HSR. You can do that in a number of ways. So you can do it as part of the overall work group, or you can go to the HSR directly. So at WorkSafe, when we send out our risk assessments, they go out to everybody, and then we encourage people to have their work group meetings and discuss those. We often get lots of feedback, and it's a really positive engagement, which is fantastic. And that's a testament to all of our HSRs at WorkSafe ACT. Again, they're not there to fix or manage. That's a really important thing, and we see that quite often where a PCBU will say, oh, this is a HSR issue, give it to the HSR, they'll fix it. It's not their job, that's not why they're there. We'll go to the next slide, thank you. We've already talked about the toolkit and our network, and what I would say to you is please come and join us. We know construction are great, they work with their HSRs really well, and we want to take a leaf out of their book, and I know there are a number of construction people here, but when a WorkSafe inspector goes out to a construction site, they will always ask for the HSR. WorkSafe inspectors should also be asking for the HSR at every site, and they should always engage with the HSR if there is one there. Often there's not. So if you are in a workplace without a HSR, the checklist will be really good for you because it encourages you and shows you ways that you can elect a HSR in your workplace. Next slide. And we've already had some great questions come in before, and this question's a great question. So why should people be HSRs when they might already be busy and overworked? And how can we help convince people to become HSRs? Yeah, it's often a thankless task being a HSR, but there are provisions within the legislation that require the PCBU to give you time and resources as a HSR. And I would encourage you, if you are a HSR, if you are not receiving the time to do your work, that you negotiate that with your PCBU. I know in some enterprise agreements there are payments for HSRs. That's also something that can be considered by a PCBU. What are our suggestions for HSRs to work constructively with PCBU? I think it's not my suggestions aren't just to HSRs. My suggestions are to both HSRs and PCBUs. And working constructively is really about going with that solutions approach rather than that problems approach, because ultimately the HSR and the PCBU really want to achieve a great safety outcome. That's why the HSR's in the role. And you're doing the PCBU a favour by being in that role. As I often say, if the biggest risk to safety is not knowing that there's a risk, and the HSR is the person that you can rely on to raise those safety risks with the workplace. And so it's really important that when you come together to solve an issue, that you come together at the same level and that you speak equally to each other. Is there evidence to show that having a HSR in the workplace leads to better work health and safety outcomes? Anecdotally, we know that this is absolutely the case, but there is no data at this stage. What we're hoping to do in the ACT as part of our network is start collecting some of that information so that we have some evidence to back up what we're saying. Excuse me. Pardon me. Too early in the morning for me. Just before I finish off, there's a couple of people that I really need to thank. And as you're sitting there enjoying your breakfast, please think about Frank, Alice and the team who've worked really hard and work really hard every month to set up these events. And so really want to thank the team at WorkSafe. Secondly, I want to thank Lish. So Lish spoke about, being early in the morning, but Lish is actually our energy bunny, the Energizer bunny that used to be, for some of the people from our generation, you'll know the Energizer bunny, and that's Lish. She's like the most amazing person to have as a MC in the morning, first thing, because she brings all of this wonderful enthusiasm and energy, and because she's done every one of our breakfasts, we're actually thinking about offering her a job. I'd also want to thank Peter and Phil and for the expertise that they're going to bring this morning. It's wonderful to have both of them here, but those of you who know Peter Miller is the psychosocial hazard guru in Australia, worked at Safe Work Australia and actually started all of that work. So we're really lucky to have Peta with her, and Peta is generously donating her time this morning, and I particularly want to thank Peta, as is Phil, and Phil tells me that he loves HSRs, and it's one of the things he likes most about his work. So thank you all for being here, and I hope you get something out of the morning.
Thank you, Jacqui. Yeah, Energizer bunny I am, able to control the rate of my speaking, not always. So hopefully you can keep me in pace. I think when I started doing these breakfasts, I must admit I'd never heard of a PCBU, a psychosocial hazard. My idea of workplace safety was my training at Questacon early on. I travelled around with a semi-trailer full of science exhibits around Australia, and we learned how to pick up a box. And so that was my understanding of workplace safety. And I must admit, it's come so far, and my understanding of it from, I think as we'll hear from Peter, psychosocial risks in the workplace, things you can't see necessarily, but definitely affect so many employees, to this. So I've been thrilled to learn so much about it. And now I did my own homework and went to see if the ABC had a workplace support, and it was interesting. It wasn't obvious. I had to do a little bit of digging, and I did find that there were people within the organisation, but no, it wasn't obvious to me. So all of this is so important. Our next speaker is Phil Hammond. Phil he's a specialist trainer. He's been a health and safety trainer with Fire Safety Australia, and he started with the National Safety Council, and he continues in a similar role. So again, Phil, as Jacqui was saying, you're a big proponent of what we're doing here today. So please give a big warm welcome to Phil Hammond.
I actually remember hearing from the HSRs about that, the Questacon manual handling training, and the ABC do have HSRs. We did a workplace inspection at Ultimo once, and they were setting up the Harry Potter makeup. It was amazing. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Phil Hammond, Fire and Safety Australia, and they've told me that I've got 5 minutes, so I've got way too many slides, but I couldn't cut it down. The reason we talk about safety isn't for legislation, it's the human cost. And the human cost, last year 200 people lost their lives at work from acute traumatic injuries. 700 people died from mesothelioma, a cancer caused by asbestos, but they don't show in these figures. Yes, unfortunately 48% of the workforce are male and 95% of the fatalities are male. 139,000 people, around about 400 a day, die from work, have serious injuries in the workplace, more than a week off work. How many others, and sorry about the movement on the slides there, how many others get reported in your first aid books that WorkSafe don't need to know about? And then what about, wrong button. What about the underreported and the near misses that don't get reported? How big is that triangle? We don't know. But we know that we need to keep aiming for zero. And I will go back. That monument is on the north side of Lake Burley Griffin. That's the Carillion in the background. There is a post there for every capital city in Australia, and the ripples around the ground are the ripples made in community when somebody dies from a workplace accident. It's next to the National Police Memorial. To try and make the workplace safer, we can't make it safe because there is always going to be some risk. But to try and make it safer, it needs to be a collaborative effort. If you operate a business, if you own the business, you're a PCBU, or a CPUB as I sometimes get told. A CPUB? No. Person conducting a business. And you've got to do everything reasonably practicable. If you don't own the business but you're on the board of directors, you have to use all due diligence to ensure that the business complies with its duty of reasonably practicable. And if you're a worker, regardless of title, manager, supervisor, team leader, apprentice, volunteer, if you work, whether you get paid or not, you have to take reasonable care. Reasonable care for yourself, make certain you don't injure other people, follow reasonable policies and procedures that you've been notified about, and follow reasonable instructions. To do that, we need the risk management approach, and the risk management approach is centred around management's commitment. It is surrounded by consultation at every level, identify, assess, control, review. It is a continuous, ongoing process. And of course, we have to use the hierarchy of control, eliminate every hazard that we can, and PPE is always the last resort. The duty to consult, and regardless of the number, it's section 46, a business has to consult with other businesses if what you're doing in a business affects the safety of other businesses. And I say safety, but remember health and safety go synonymously, and health is physical and psychological health. So up until recently, that was only ever in the definitions in the Act. We now have regulations in the regs about psychosocial risks. Section 47, businesses have got to talk to their workers. Managers don't have to have all the ideas. You've only got to sign off on the final decision. And as we've just been told, if you go to somebody with a problem, make certain you take up a couple of ideas as well. The Act and the regs tell us what the laws are, but the Code of Practice, WHS-CCC, Work Health and Safety Consultation, Cooperation, Coordination, Code of Practice will help explain what HSRs are, the work groups, the deputies, the committees, and also issue resolution. Remember, in the ACT, major construction projects have additional requirements that don't exist in any other jurisdiction. That there are additional requirements on the election and also the training requirements for HSRs and committees within major construction projects. As a HSR, your role and understanding your role is basically very well put out in Worker Representation and Participation Guide. I'd like it to be renamed to HSR Handbook. Section 68 should be in a role description, not a position description. I know some HSRs get paid extra, but it shouldn't be that. It is not a duty, it is a function. You have the power to represent members of the work group in matters of work health and safety. You have the power to monitor what the business is doing to manage it. You have the power to investigate complaints from members of your work group. And you've got the power to raise anything that nobody else has raised about work health and safety. You're not expected to be an expert, you're part of the consulting, not part of the management. And Section 66 is your immunity pin. Just like MasterChef, you're immune from prosecution if you do everything in all good faith. It's not your fault that you told somebody not to get hurt. Hopefully it's everybody's duty to talk to the person next to them and say, don't do it. You can conduct an inspection at any workplace where members of your work group work, and that includes working from home. You can accompany an inspector from WorkSafe whenever the inspector is inspecting an area where members of your workgroup work. You can attend an interview from an inspector or a line manager if the member in your workgroup wants you to be in that interview. No one can stop you. And you can request the setup of a safety committee. You can receive information about the health and safety of workers and the workplace, and you can request assistance. And you can do all of that without training. But if you do the 5-day course, you can also issue cease work directions to other people in your work group, and you can issue a PIN as a last resort. If you're going to do that, and section 68.4, one of my students told me this one day, never forget that number, you don't have to do anything if you don't want to. And that's why I said I'm not happy about HSRs being paid extra. First aiders have to give first aid, HSRs don't have to do anything, but they can't be stopped from doing it if they want. You should have an agreed issue resolution procedure in your workplace. It should be a flow chart, and it should go down to at what point do we step outside of our organisation to help resolve an issue. When do we call an inspector officially? You can call them anytime. Send emails, talk to them. Safe work is really good to get in touch with. Hey, I've got an issue. Where should I look? Do it. If a member in your workgroup has an issue, they should go and see their manager. Of course, the HSR can be the third side in the discussion. Not the meat and the sandwich. It's not your job to tell the members of the workforce what management want done, and it's not your job to be sent as an attack dog to take out the manager for doing the wrong thing. All you're trying to do is help the worker in your workgroup understand they have a right to speak up and to be heard. And the manager has a right and a responsibility to listen and to take their input into account before making a final decision. Questions, these are questions that I've created since I've been doing this for a little while. I actually started doing HSRs with the Commonwealth before harmonisation came in, so that's where it's here. The first question is always, is there imminent immediate risk of serious injury? If there is, stop work or don't start. Tell the boss and commence a document trail. You need evidence of consultation. We need the system to work. And there are sample templates on WorkSafe's webpage. What is the safety issue? If it's not a safety issue, you have no right to be involved as a HSR. If you're the HSR and the union delegate, let them know which hat you're wearing. Standing on a table is dangerous. Getting $1 an hour hype money is industrial relations. It's got nothing to do with safety. Are they in your work group? If not, tell them to go and get their own HSR. And if they don't have one, they can put their hand up and they can be given guaranteed 5 days training if they ask for it. Union delegate and HSR are the only 2 roles in a workplace that you can demand to get training and have to be allowed. What do they want done? Begin with the end in mind. So ask them what do they want done. You might have to prompt them about I don't want a pair of earplugs, let's get a silencer, or encase the thing with a guard, because they don't know the hierarchy of control. They forgot what was on their induction on day 1. So begin with the end in mind. What have they done about it so far? And what help do they want? Not what do you want me to do for you? Remembering the PIN is the last resort, use the template online and make certain you ring an inspector before you issue the PIN. The number of phone calls I get from students going, I just issued a PIN and what can I do now? What did the inspector say? I didn't ask an inspector. Guess what happens when people complain about the PIN? They ring an inspector. Utilise resources from WorkSafe. There's copies of the Act and the regs, and remember in the ACT it is now a notifiable incident for sexual assault. It's the only place in Australia that is now one of the notifiable incidents. Stay up to date. There's resources available by industry, there's resources available by topic. Even the functions of the inspectors are to assist and to help and to come out. They even do a monthly report on what they've been up to. So please utilise resources. And coming back to that resource, probably 2 hours a week is a good amount of time for a HSR to be spending as a HSR. If you're spending 1 day a week as a HSR, you're probably doing the safety officer's job, not the HSR's job. You're part of the conversation, not managing it. We want to know why it's not happening automatically, because we don't have to have HSRs, set major construction, but we do have to consult. Thank you.
My goodness, that was extraordinary, Phil, how you could incorporate so much knowledge, years and years of experience into 5 comprehensive minutes. But I did take down your number, Phil, so I hope everybody else saw that Phil's number was on the screen, so I don't know if you're open to conversations. But really interesting to point out that you're not safety officers, you're a HSR, and it's not a required role in every organisation. So, and I think if you've got any questions so far from whether it's Jacqui, Phil or Peta, please just keep updating them on the QR code, and we'll have some time after a short break to ask all those questions. Our next speaker for this morning is Dr. Peta Miller, who's a work health safety consultant. And as Jacqui highlighted, she really introduced the idea of psychosocial hazards in the workplace to Australia. 40 years of experience leading work health and safety strategy, policy, research, and now, of course, just translating that into real outcomes so we can all go home healthy and safe. Dr. Miller, thanks for joining us.
I'm assuming I just press. So thank you, first of all. Our HSRs in the room, you're helping workers' voices in the ACT be heard. It's a challenging job, but absolutely critical. I'm a health and safety professional with 40 years' experience. You're actually having more impact than I ever did because you're down there on the ground, so thank you for your time. I like to always put this map up of Australia to show how many Indigenous nations were across Australia and are, and I live and work on the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I acknowledge all of you who are Indigenous or Torres Strait Islander peoples in the room today. So first of all, let's start with the common default, is that organisations often ignore psychosocial hazards and risks created by the work and instead focus on unacceptable workplace behaviours, which as a HSR may be one of the first reasons you get asked to actually intervene, and which might be lack of teamwork, interpersonal conflict, etc. Often there's a focus on poor performance, errors, taking safety shortcuts is a big one, and not following quality processes, or the workers' issues in terms of home pressures and poor self-care behaviours. But these are often coping mechanisms to workplace pressures that actually are the result of how work is designed and organised. So in fact, are ones that the employers can actually do something about. So as HSRs, you may get called in on this, but I actually want to just focus on one aspect here, is that your ability to communicate effectively is critical to your role as an effective HSR. What you do is emotionally challenging. You're going to be talking to workers who are emotionally distressed, and you will also be talking to PCBUs and representatives of the PCUBs whose emotions may be heightened. So I want to take a slightly different approach today and just say, let's actually think about how communication changes under stress and what you might do to actually look after yourselves, look after the worker group you're representing, but also be aware of how that might change your communication methods with the PCBU or their representatives. So when any of us are faced in high stress situations, there's physiological, cognitive and emotional responses. I'm going to whiz through these, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about some that are more really important. You all know that stress justice isn't in the mind. So when you're having stressful conversations, there are physiological responses going on inside of you. You may feel nervous and nauseous. And over the long term, term, the workers and yourself may be who are exposed to stress may have chronic poor health issues. You know all this, but what I really wanted to talk more about is the emotional and behavioural responses. So when you or the workers you are talking to or the employers you're talking to are under stress, we will all tend to be emotionally more reactive. We will flare and react in ways perhaps we wouldn't when we were calmer. There's increased rates of bullying and depression and anxiety, and a great deal more tendency to be disengaged. The focus today is on the reduced communication effectiveness and people's willingness to spend discretionary effort. What I want us also to think about is the common emotional responses to stress. Typically, we've all heard about fight, flight, face and freeze, and they're explained there. Thanks. And what I'd like us to focus on when we're in our conversations later on is how do we move out of our instinctive responses and ask our workers when they're talking to you to move out of those instinctive process into the more functional quadrant, which is facing, which is connecting and being calm, listening and sharing opinions in respectful manners. So I thought I always like to put in a slightly different angle to when I'm talking about the impact of stress, because we're all quite aware of the emotional responses and the psychological responses. But you can also, when you're communicating with employers, say, it's actually really, you solve the stress problems, and the work health and safety problems generally, you actually have performance benefits. So under stress, on average, depends a bit, it gets worse as the stress gets higher. Our mental and physical reaction times change. There's actually up to a 50% deterioration in it. You know, some people say, oh, it's actually good to be stressed. Well, no, it's not. It's actually, that's arousal. But after a point when you become physiologically stressed, like I showed in that first slide, you will have performance problems, and then there will be more slips, laps, mistakes and safety violations. So what's happening? We're having attention and tunnelling, so there's reduced situational awareness. So workers may have actually ignored something and taken a decision which actually impaired safety. They'll have tried to reduce some of the load on themselves, so they'll have made some decisions about which tasks they won't do. That may have been the right decision or may not. And again, I'm raising all these because they actually may be some of the issues that workers are bringing to you. They'll certainly always have impaired concentration and memory, which is affecting their decision making, and all of us get more disorganised in our thinking when we're under stress and tend to rely on our mental shortcuts, which is fine if the training is well designed and delivered by a competent person and actually relevant. But if it's poor training or it's delivered 6 years ago and you've forgotten everything, it won't actually be very helpful for that immediate stressful interim. And the other issue that's happening, which is quite important when you're advocating for work groups, is there's a deference to power. And what that means is that people who are emotionally and psychologically exhausted step back and say, oh, whatever you think. Okay. And they may not be actually making the best decisions. So we need to be really aware when you're negotiating that these reactions will change when people are under stress. And finally, stress impairs workers' performance and your own, and poor performance is incredibly stressful. I know that we're going to get called back up, but I just wanted to draw your attention to some of those communication changes that might impact your own and the workers that you're representing's ability to communicate calmly and in a solutions-focused approach when you're negotiating. And, of course, the PCBU. They're going to have their emotions heightened too. I'm going to come down.
Again, thank you so much, Dr. Miller. Incredible. Now, no doubt, lots of questions, lots of things raised, much more work to do, and you had homework to do. I hope you all did it. Just because this is a part of a consultation and we really want to get your ideas, your thoughts on this toolkit that WorkSafe ACT is producing. So please have a look at the stuff on your table, at the scenarios, and also fill in the questionnaire. You'll see up here we've got the QR code. We're surrounded by QR codes. There is not a single reason to not scan it, and please just do the questionnaire. If you've got any questions, put them up there. And we'll take a 5-minute break. Go and grab yourself a coffee. If there's a spare breakfast beside you that hasn't been eaten, please eat it. Or put it in your lunchbox to take for lunch, and we'll take a short break, and then we'll get back here in 5 minutes. Now, and if you just scan the QR code, all of the questions will come up, and as I said, just keep voting if you want one to rise to the top. I've also got access here to what industry or work people represent, and I think you can see there 40% government, 27% building and construction, other. Anyone want to shout out what the other is? Other? No, we'll just keep it at other. Education, 12, health, 6. Retail, no retail today. But please keep adding thoughts onto that. Does your workplace have a HSR? 83%? No, 17%. So, and the first question actually relates quite heavily to getting HSRs. So I think we might kick off our questions. Here we are. Become considerate. Yep, all of these great questions. And next slide we might do. So I think we'll kick off to the questions for Jacqui, Agius, Phil, Hammond and Dr. Peta Miller. Keep adding yours as we go along, or just raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone along. Also, welcome to hear your experiences and how it can relate to a question in there. So the first question we'll kick off with, and I'm just going to put it to the person. Please, if you'd like to be the person to speak to it, and if you have something else to add to it, that'd be great. What do I do if my PCBU is blocking us having an HSR elected, i.e. not responding to workers initiating the process? I think we'll start with Jacqui Jacqui on this one.
Sure. Thank you for the questions. They're great. Firstly, I need to say that it's right within the Work Health and Safety Act that you can ask for a HSR and have a work group in your workplace. There are time frames within the Act that require that if you make a request, essentially the best way to do it is this: send an email to the PCBU saying that this group of workers would like to form a work group and that we would like an election held for an HSR. And then the PCBU have a certain amount of time to respond to that email. If they do not, then they're not following the process within the Work Health and Safety Act. That's when you call us and we can intervene for you and on your behalf and on behalf of the work group. And now we have done that numerous times. We are the only jurisdiction, currently the only jurisdiction in the ACT where Uber drivers have HSRs, and that was because they requested to form work groups, and the PCBU didn't come to the party, and so our inspectors went in and negotiated a HSR system for them, and I can see that inspector who did most of that work in the room. So yes, come and just absolutely, if the PCBU isn't coming to the party, let us know. But what's really important is you stick to that process that's in the Act.
Yeah, I was going to get to answer that first, and all I was going to say is ring WorkSafe. Yeah, look, but just with that, you don't have to wait until it's been progressed. Ring WorkSafe and ask, what should I do? And they'll tell you, build that document trail, go through the process. Because look, at the end of the day, you're still going to have to keep that relationship with your boss. That you know, it's me against you. It's what can we do to do this workplace better.
And I wonder, Peter, what some of the resistance is from the PCBUs in putting in a HSR, and if anyone has any experience of why the PCBU has resisted it. Is there, no doubt communication is a big thing, but also what would be?
One of the reasons could be that the PCBU doesn't understand the obligations that they have under the Work Health and Safety Act, and more often than not, that is what the issue is. So it's really about us educating and getting information out there, and that's what part of today's about.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that fear, lack of knowledge, but fear, and perhaps have had previous experiences where it hasn't gone well, and I think that's why Jacqui and I, when we were talking about what I would focus on, is like, let's be aware of how people respond when they're communicating under stress, and try and change the way we respond so it becomes solution focused and positive, and we face with courtesy and respect the negotiation that's going on.
Just on that one, with I love Peta's stuff, but I heard her last December speaking. But just understand that people are going to vent. So let them vent and then come back to the logic afterwards. So don't take it as a first reaction and bite into it. It's about a solution, it's not about the argument.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to say is that, part of what we're doing here to try and give you power is take that step back, take a breath. Take a breath when you're negotiating, because it is stressful. Understand how you've historically reacted in the past. Perhaps consider how you'd like to be responding. Watch how people are responding to you, and try not, if they're being hostile and reacting, try not mirror them, but take a breath, take the time and actively listen and solicit from them what it is that they're worried about. I've gone slightly off the topic, but I think for me that's actually about how we can de-escalate the situation and remove some of the fear.
Has that answered the question for people? And if not, please keep adding to the questions on the Slido. Can an HSR be appointed by the workplace if the staff decline to elect one?
Yeah, I'll take that one. It's not in the law, but it's not against the law. And I would say I'd probably get half of my students from being told, "Oh, why don't you volunteer?" And they turn up and go, "I just got told to be a HSR." Most of your managers already know who's prepared to get off the backside and do something. So that's why you're there, because you're prepared to listen and you're prepared to be part of the conversation. It's just a de-stressing of the whole process.
I would say in relation to that one, yes, they can, but it's not ideal. And it's not ideal because the whole system is set up in order for the workers to elect someone to represent them and to represent their safety interests. And often if someone is appointed by the workplace, workers are less likely to approach that person and seek their assistance.
You all said that it's a pretty thankless task being an HSR, but an incredibly vital one. How do you then, not sweeten the deal, but training, what sort of person makes a great HSR? Because you said a paid person doesn't necessarily always make a great HSR. Phil?
Yeah, well, I suppose the person that's the group want to represent them, and as I'm going to say, after the first year, when the person got sent up, I'd tell them go back and arrange the election. Now that they've seen what a HSR can do, let other people know, "Oh, I'm going to do a workplace inspection, would you come with me?" And so that they realise that you're not the safety officer. People on the floor don't see the HSR as a representative in a conversation.
Yeah, and not being a problem seeker, but a solution solver, or okay. Might move on to the next question. Is it possible to set up an HSR request portal within WorkSafe ACT so the requester in a business can remain anonymous to the PCBU?
That's a great a great suggestion, and we'll take that on board as part of the consultation. I'm sure one of our people are there taking note of that one. It's something that we will consider, but you can always, can I say that, you can always come to us and speak to an inspector or put in an online request and ask that your name not be used in the workplace, and we will always respect that request.
So just on that one, it is a format on WorkSafe's webpage in the ACT that you can report where an issue is with a business, even if it's not your business, and you can report it on the map and remain anonymous. It's a great point.
And I wonder if it comes back to that first question, what to do if my PCBU is blocking us having an HSR elected. Is anonymity a big thing? Because so many times throughout these workshops I've heard that people are really afraid of losing their jobs if they speak up or highlight a safety concern or request for an HSR. Is it a big part of it, the anonymity?
I believe so, and so that's an excellent suggestion. And then once elected, then people can feel more confident that they are actually representing everybody's views. And I'd also like workers out there to actually be supporting their HSRs. You do have a challenging and critical role, and in my conversations with HSRs, often heard people say, well, we said something and then my work group didn't get behind me, or they did. So if you are a HSR, go back to your work group and put them on notice. You voted me, asked me to raise this issue. Stand behind me if I'm raising and having difficult conversations on your behalf.
Okay, moving right along on the questions, keep adding them, voting for them. Which businesses are mandated to have an HSR?
So in the ACT, construction industries must have HSRs. By everyone else, though, it's a request. It's by request. So everyone is mandated, in a sense, but it only happens at the request of the work group. So if the work group doesn't request it, then there's no obligation for the PCBU.
Yeah. Should a deputy... Oh, no, sorry. What role have unions played in ensuring HSRs are supported and protected in the workplace?
If we didn't have unions, we wouldn't have safety legislation. And that's a big one. And unions are always a fallback. They're another person you can ask for expert advice, and they can go across across industries without worried about competition problems. So.
And I'll just encourage you all to actually reach out to your union if you need emotional support, as well as groups like Lifeline, etc. Because WorkSafe can't give you that. They can give you practical solutions and deal with that, but they're not there to give you the emotional support, whereas your union should be. They're giving you practical tips and helping you out for your incredibly challenging but really important role.
And just on that one, don't forget Mates in Construction. Is a part of psychosocial support for the construction industry, and it's growing into other industries as well.
On that, which businesses are mandated to have an HSR? I think construction you mentioned.
Sorry, Lish, I was saying earlier that everybody can have an HSR, but it is only mandated when the request comes from the work group.
How large should a work group be to require a deputy HSR?
How long's a piece of string? Well, it depends on what your work group is, I suppose. If you're in a call centre with 400 people on one shift, then it might work. But if you're on 15 locations and different skill sets, and some people are driving trucks, some are answering phones, then you probably need to look at what works. And as I said, take it back to what can I do in 2 hours a week? If I'm spending every second day out of the workplace, then we probably need a lot more HSRs and work groups. It's about that balance.
I'd also like to suggest if you've got a very complex work site, perhaps there's some chemical issues and you're not comfortable providing chemical advice or psychosocial or musculoskeletal advice or respiratory advice, that sort of thing, perhaps then it might be worth actually saying, have you got some could you help me out on this? I'm feeling a bit wobbly about this until I build my skills. So, what I was going to sort of suggest later is, in terms of how we can support HSRs, one of them is to give each other, I see we've got a network suggestion there, but also reach out to your other co-workers to, if they know something about a particular health and safety risk that you're not feeling so confident about.
I love that question, by the way, because it comes up, ratios come up quite a lot when it comes to how many HSRs should we have, how many deputy HSRs should we have, and the Act is purposely silent on that. And the reason it is silent is because it's up to the work group to determine how many HSRs we need and how many deputies we need, and that will be dependent on the workplace. So, for instance, if it is a high-risk workplace, then you may need more HSRs and more deputy HSRs. If you're in an office space and predominantly working in an office, then you may have less HSRs because you won't have any of those really high-risk activities like high-risk construction work, for instance. So it's really important to make that point. The Act doesn't specify because they leave it up to the work group, and it's a negotiation between the work group and the PCBU to determine what is sufficient in that particular workplace.
I think we've asked, should a deputy HSR always be in place? Again,
I would say yes, and the reason that I would say yes, it's not a requirement. The reason I say yes is if you only have one HSR and that HSR's on leave, what do you do when that HSR's on leave? So it's my view that you should always have a deputy, but as I said, it's not a requirement.
Just on that one, the legislation says the deputy does nothing unless the HSR's away. So how do we keep them up to date? Just the questions. I'd like to see some perpetual email addresses set up, HSR Workgroup 7 at my workplace, so the deputy can be involved in the conversation and know what the issue was now that the HSR's not here today. But also, whether you have 5 HSRs or 1 HSR and 4 deputies, depends on the workplace and what works for you.
This one, we have several HSRs. How often should they meet to discuss?
Again, that's up to the HSRs, but there should be a safety committee set up in the workplace, and the safety committee should have regular meetings, and the safety committee is a committee between the HSRs and the PCBUs. But it's really up to the work group to determine whether they want to have regular meetings or whether they just want to have meetings when somebody wants to raise a risk or raise a safety hazard in the workplace. And that will really be dependent on that individual HSR or those HSRs and how they want to work together. But the key absolutely is communication. It's got to be, because if one HSR doesn't know what's going on with the other HSR and they're trying to negotiate the same thing, then that's just doubling up on work and problematic. So communication is the key.
Yeah, and I guess what I'd also say, sorry about my throat here, is that where there's multiple work group HSRs, that they're regularly communicating with each other in meetings, so that may feel like a bit of a burden, but there are many issues that are organisationally common across an organisation, and so you want to know if that's been raised and there's a common solution. The other thing that makes me a little bit uncomfortable is if they're not meeting regularly. We know that psychosocial risks and physical risks rapidly evolve, and it will maybe missed. So in high complex, high risk industries and things that are rapidly changing, or where there's a lot of turnover in staff, I'd be really encouraging them to meet far more often. It doesn't have to be long, but to make sure that they've got their finger on the pulse.
I think I'll flip down to that then. Can we have a cool HSR network? Everybody wants a cool HSR network. But is that part, but not both, within the workplace of the support of HSRs, but at a broader level? Is there a possibility of that, or is there something?
Absolutely, and it is one of the things that WorkSafe ACT want to consult about, and that is, do HSRs think it would be useful for them to have a network in the ACT? It's something that we would like to do.
And I think your names are on the list from today. Just on the committees and HSRs, you can have committees that don't have HSRs on them or aren't entirely about HSRs. I've got a couple of workplaces that we deal with that have HSR meetings separate to the committees, but ideally I think a safety committee should be all the HSRs and deputies and a manager, and just so that everyone's in the conversation. It can be really lonely being a HSR. Management hate you because you made them do things they didn't want to do. The workers hate you because you didn't make management do all the things they wanted them to do. So it's good to be able to meet with other people and, as you said, get around that. It's not about the person, it's about the system, and it's about improving the workplace.
And on that, and I think this points to this next question, it sounds like being an HSR could place someone in greater risk of psychosocial injury. If everybody hates you, I think there was another question further down, why would anyone, what are the perks of being an HSR? Like, why would you do it, apart from the core
I think
help?
Anyone that decides to take on a role as HSR, it's because they have a passion for safety. And that I often say about people who get into the safety industry, you either have the safety bug or you don't, and if you have the safety bug, you never get out of it. It's just something that you do for life. And there are lots of rewards other than being passionate about safety. Supporting your workplace to be safe is, I think, a role that is a really important role, because you're actually hopefully preventing injuries, but you're also keeping your own workplace safe, and that's a really important thing. And what we're trying to do here, by starting off the conversation today, is to ensure that HSRs become respected in their workplaces and are utilised by everybody, including the PCBU. But there's work for all of us to do. There's work for PCBUs to do, work for HSRs to do, and work for us to do.
And on that question then, I think, are people, HSRs, at a greater risk of psychosocial hazards?
Yes, you are. And so, but I'm just going to flip back to that. I know so many, I've been in this space 40 years, I know so many people who started their health and safety career as the HSR with that first training, and then went on and then did additional training. And actually, I'm in the College of Fellows for the Australian Institute of Health and Safety, and they're now professionals in this space. So it actually can be a really rewarding career path. Yes, they are, and that's why you've also got to look after yourself. One of the things is to self-regulate yourself and seek care and support when you need it. We know that when you're experiencing high work demands, which you will as a HSR, one of the ways you can moderate that stress is getting additional emotional and practical support. So get it from your co-workers. Talk to them. Get it from your other HSRs. Get it from a HSR network. And take a breath and step back if you need to. Although you're incredibly important, your mental health is actually the most important thing for yourself and your family. And it's okay to call it quits sometimes too.
It's fascinating to me that this is a volunteer role. Like, the more I hear you all speak about it, the more I feel that it's such a vital role, that conduit between the PCBU and the workers.
I was just going to say, going on from what Peter was saying, don't be afraid as a HSR to ring your EAP, your Employee Assistance Program, just so that you can have a conversation. It's not that you need help, it's just nice to have that, and this is why HSRs work. It's nice to have someone in the conversation that's not emotionally involved. Yeah. So
I was just going to say, I'd like to flip it around to the PCBUs. You started quite rightly saying, they're doing you a favour. This is incredibly important. So how about you reward and recognise those? And that's actually another way you can balance the demands. And I don't just mean the financial way. I mean the PCBU saying thank you at the end of this, negotiation you did with us of raising this issue. That was incredibly helpful. And the work groups themselves giving praise and thanks to you for the great work that you do.
And just picking up on that point around they're doing PCBUs a favour, which absolutely they are. We also, as PCBUs, need to ensure that we give our HSRs the time and resources to do their job, and that is a requirement. So that means that if there is a pointy hazard that we're managing at the moment, we understand as a PCBU that that is the only work the HSR is doing, that we recognise that what the HSR is doing is work, that they're not skiving off and they're not avoiding doing other work, they're actually working by doing their HSR roles, and that we recognise that role as work rather than they're doing this on top of having to do their regular role. And that will mean needing to ensure that their workload is balanced out during those times, and that they have less duties to do from their usual position description. But we really, as PCBUs, must recognise what the HSRs do is work.
Yeah, and just on that with the inspiration, I know I said management hate you and workers hate you, but you also build that rapport that they welcome having somebody that they can go to and say, how's this going to go on the floor? Well, I don't think you better do it that way. So having that advice, you're going to be able to speak up for yourself. It is a toe in the water. Do I want to be a safety expert, or am I happy with my day job and just do this as an extra? But remember, a lot of HSRs and union delegates do get promoted to supervisory roles, not because it's a way of getting rid of them. It's because your boss has already seen you. You've been interviewed. They know that you can listen to people with conflicting opinions. They know that you can help the business come up with constructive solutions. So all you've got to do is put your resume in. That's the job ad.
See? Turn it around. When should an HSR be consulting with the PCBU when businesses have a WHS officer? What's the hierarchical structure, communication style?
I recommend that every HSR sits down with their manager at least once a week, once a fortnight, no further apart than that, because otherwise we end up with too many problems. They should be looking at what hazards have been raised, what solutions are on the ball, and then that way that keeps that relationship going.
The Work Health and Safety Manager Officer should be actively seeking to talk to you as HSRs. As the employer rep, the WHS officer should be welcoming your advice, and you know the work, as we say in WHS, you know the work is real versus imagined, and a whole lot of the issues that management have maybe is as they imagine work is being done versus as it's really done. So as a WHS professional, I'd be very disappointed if there is a WHS manager on site if they're not regularly having catch-ups with the HSR network for their company.
And I think that question's a little bit about the difference between a WHS officer and a PCBU. And I think the best example I can use is our particular workplace. So because we're an independent statutory authority, if a issue isn't resolved at a lower level, it needs to go somewhere. And so having a WHS officer to resolve issues and work with the HSR means that a PCBU is there. If the matter doesn't get resolved, then it can be heightened to the officer or the PCBU in the agency. So I would say try first, and then if you're not getting anything out of that, then you raise it to someone higher.
Phil, this is probably for you. What sort of training is provided to HSRs? Is it?
Sales reps got the brochures. So HSRs, the law says 5 days upon request or mandatory for construction in the ACT, and then the 1-day refresher is available each year thereafter if requested and if they feel like it. But once again, coming back to it, what about doing some specialist stuff? If we've got high-risk chemicals, should we be doing some subject matter stuff in addition to make certain HSR gets at least as much as everyone else in the workplace?
And here's a challenge for you, Jacqui, and your officers, is I'd like to be seeing more, great that you've got your toolkit just starting, but more resources for HSRs that are specific to particular industries. So, for example, for retail about violence or sexual harassment, that's in forms that they can actually use and that are online and free. And that I think that it will be really useful for them also to have access to data, because often maybe no worker in their sector, their company has actually put in the complaint, but they've got a fairly good sense that actually it's a really common issue. So if they had access to user-friendly data, maybe they can actually bring it back to the PCBU and say, well, WorkSafe says this is a really common issue. Maybe workers aren't feeling psychologically safe to report the issue. Do you think we should actually be adding this to our workplace survey, etc.?
I think just in the last couple of minutes, 2 short questions. Does there have to be evidence of an election being held and the results?
Should be.
Yes, there should be.
Should be, but is there?
And
well, the thing is, it's cover your backside. What happens when an inspector walks in and says you haven't held elections as requested, and you go, here's our evidence, we call for nominations, we closed the election at this time and we held it, one person elected unopposed, that's what the legislation says.
Should be all minuted?
Yeah.
Okay. Is WorkSafe planning to do compliance visits on HSRs?
Operations planning is through to about mid-next year. So the first phase that we always use is the education consultation phase. That's what we're in now. And then we'll look at whether to move to an operational phase once we've done this initial consultation.
And just before we wrap it up, I'd love one comment from each of you, just one thing you want people to go away with in terms of being a HSR and the support required and the importance.
I'd encourage you all to contemplate and perhaps seek others' comments about what's your communication style when you're under stress. What are you reverting to? What are the non-verbal cues you're giving out? And perhaps just learn to refine your communication skills under stress, because we all tend to revert to this sort of instinctive fight, flight or freeze response, and really we want to move to face. But where are you instinctively reacting from, and how can you change?
Great.
Yeah, and I've left all the psychosocial to Peta. How do we work with other people? But use the system. It's about having a safe management system, or the only system we use, an integrated management system, whether it's safety, quality, environment, it doesn't matter. This is the way we do things here. Build the system. And just with that HSR as well, at 2 hours a week, some of that, do an inspection one week, do a committee meeting the next week, meet with your manager, but also use the time to have a look at your company policies and procedures and have a look at WorkSafe's webpage so that you're up to date with what's happening. Because there is a code of practice on psychosocial in the ACT, comes into place on the 27th of November. That was my homework, sorry. Yes, sorry. Oh, okay, it's in place.
I'm going to take a little bit of a different position on this one, just because one of the things that I've learned in this role and being a PCBU for the first time is that your HSR is your greatest resource. And the one thing that I know that keeps me awake at night is the safety of my own people. And I know that the HSR has their backs, and that means they've got mine.
Fantastic. And thank you all for coming out this morning, an hour and a half of power. Thanks to the WorkSafe ACT crew for putting it together, for audio-visual, the Realm delicious breakfast. Please take a doggy bag. And thanks to our 3 fabulous guests this morning. Jacqui, Agius, Phil Hammond and Dr Peta Miller. And before Phil goes, I've just noticed that he's wearing merch socks, so he'll be selling those out the front to raise money. Thank you all for coming.